So we are almost definitely going to fight the European elections, independently, or in some form of coordination with other Remain committed parties. But what beyond Remain should we put forward in our campaign? First and foremost, we have to make the case for continuing British participation in managing relations among European governments, warts and all. We should not risk getting bogged down in discussions about how to reform and improve Europe's current institutions. They don't work very well, but neither do our national political institutions, and they work much better than any other international institutions, think WTO, UN, so far created. Our neighbors across the Channel are our closest partners in almost every way. They are our most important trading partners. They share our democratic values, with some backsliding, but then there's some of that within the UK as well. They are vital to Britain's safety and security. Liam Fox may argue that Australia and New Zealand are emotionally much closer to Britain than the Netherlands and France, but they are much further away, and much smaller, and we can maintain close relations with them as well as our European neighbours. Brexiters like Marc-Francois wallow in the myths of Britain standing alone in World War II while those on the other side of the Channel collapsed, and we saved them. We need to go for that myth wherever we hear it. The largest contingent of foreign pilots in the Battle of Britain was from Poland. There were also many Belgian pilots, then and throughout the war. The idea that we can pull Britain away from countries which have been entangled in British history since Roman times, and follow the Trump administration in the USA and maybe also the Russian government, is absurd. Other issues fit into this approach. The world is in a climate change emergency. The EU is one of the major players in developing global responses to climate change, pushing against reluctant governments in the USA, China and elsewhere. Yes, the EU isn't perfect here either, but it's better than the rest. We have much more influence over limiting global warming as part of a European caucus than on our own, outside. The economic case for staying inside is also strong. Leavers in the referendum campaign peddled the fantasy that there are other countries enthusiastic for striking free trade deals with Britain on its own. 3 years later, the USA is aggressively protectionist, China is aiming to dominate advanced technologies, and India is unwilling to offer Britain concessions it would not grant the EU. We look to be heading towards a global recession, best therefore to stay in the world's largest single market, and cooperate with our neighbours in weathering the storm. The Leave campaign cleverly converted popular concern over immigration into a Brexit issue, suggesting that immigrants were flooding in from the European continent. Now the UK economy is suffering as skilled EU citizens return home, while numbers of migrants from outside the EU, who are always a larger proportion of incomers, continue to increase. It's clear that the UK and other rich democratic states face a common challenge of determined migrants from poorer countries, and refugees from conflicts, dictatorships and failed states struggling to find safety and prosperity. That's a common challenge, which we will manage better by working with others, to share asylum programs, to combat people smuggling, and to promote development and good governance, and women's rights, across the world. The Leave campaign also succeeded in persuading the left behind that the EU, not domestic politics and financial priorities, was the prime source of their problems. We need to argue that many of Britain's domestic failings, in education, public investment, housing, industrial strategy, are the result of domestic failures stretching back 20 years or more, rather than of dictates from Brussels, and can only be resolved by changes in domestic policy. EU regional funds, recycling part of the UK's budgetary contributions, have done more to assist our poorer regions than the Conservative government would have done on its own. Right-wing populists who are pushing for a hard Brexit want to make Britain a low-tax free market economy, and leave disadvantaged regions further behind. We should be pushing for a longer-term investment in skills, transport infrastructure, and innovation, whether or not we stay in the EU, but recognizing that will be easier to achieve if we stay in. Let's see what our manifesto says. I'm told it's almost ready. The local election campaign should give us a good start. We've got good arguments to make. Let's make them as loudly and persuasively as we can. Asterisk. Lord Wallace of Saltaire is a Liberal Democrat member of the House of Lords. Let's block ads. Why?